I'm really grateful to be with you today. It's another beautiful day in America and another really crystallizing moment. Over the last year, it almost seems like since Donald Trump became president, we finally got an outsider in the White House. We finally got somebody in the White House who was not primarily a politician, not primarily a lawyer. It's a detriment to this country that the majority of our politicians are lawyers because they talk like lawyers and they think like politicians, which is really bad for everybody. But one of the things I like most about the Trump White House is it seems like every week there is a new crystallizing moment. The two shootings a couple weeks ago really clarified the issue in terms of guns in many ways. And today, I want to talk to you about the death of Jeffrey Epstein as another really clarifying moment in American politics. And this moment, unfortunately, I think crystallizes how broken in some ways the American justice system is. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, is the billionaire pedophile, the Democrat operative, the promoter of liberal causes, the child-abusing pedophile, all of those things in one. And it really is shocking when you think back to the fact that as recently as 2008, I believe it was, that Jeffrey Epstein was actually convicted and forced to register as a sex offender, the National Sex Offender Registry. But because of his tremendous wealth and privilege, to say nothing of his contacts, which primarily include high-ranking Democrats, we know that the paths of Epstein and Trump had crossed before, that Trump actually threw him out of one of his hotel spas and had to get involved after allegations against Epstein's sexual predilections manifested themselves. But we have no other evidence, and we certainly have no evidence that Donald Trump ever visited Sex Island, we can call it, the fantasy sex island that this billionaire had in the middle of the Caribbean, which allowed him to bring people to his own compound, young girls, and apparently abuse them. It's kind of a twisted version of Fantasy Island 1970s, right? You can almost see Tattoo, boss, the school bus, dropping off these underage girls. It's just creepy when you stop and think about it. But we can't divorce the fact that Epstein's entire political career has primarily been one that's been bound up with Democrat politics and Democrat politicians. This is the thing that I find so frustrating, that whenever you have connections between bad people and Republican causes, the bad people are an indictment of Republicanism, right? Or conservatism. Whenever bad people do bad things in the name of conservative ideas, even one of the shooters, the El Paso shooter, right, who had much more of, to my mind, had much more of the libertarian Democrat to him than he did the right-wing conservative. Nevertheless, the Dayton shooter and the Texas shooter have both been chalked up to right-wing hate. Whenever you get these things happening, that's an indictment of conservatives. It's just conservatives' fault that this happened, conservative rhetoric, conservative politics, because you had a shooter who was anti-immigrant. This means the entire Republican platform is a lie and it's hateful. AOC and the crew are out there saying things like Republican politics, conservative beliefs, this enables killing and enables murder, it enables xenophobia against immigrants. But when you flip the coin, and these bad things happen, and they're done in the name of Democrat politics. We mentioned already how the Dayton shooter was clearly a libertarian leftist, a big supporter of Elizabeth Warren. That narrative gets no play in the media. We're not interested in it. And it's interesting how the media never holds Democrat politicians responsible for things done in the name of Democrats like Elizabeth Warren. Very frustrating, and it's a very dysfunctional symbol of the times we live in. Steve Scalise, you may remember Steve Scalise, the Republican, who was actually shot almost to death while playing a softball game by a loyal Democrat partisan ideologue. And Scalise came out and said something really moving.
But to try to assign blame to somebody else, I think, is a very slippery slope. Because the president's no more responsible for that shooting as your next guest, Bernie Sanders, is for my shooting. And he's not, by the way, responsible. The shooter is responsible.
It's a remarkably adult, remarkably pure, remarkably bipartisan idea. You may recall the person who shot Scalise was a big supporter of Bernie Sanders, a big supporter of socialism. And Scalise comes out and basically says, I do not blame Bernie Sanders for what that nut job did in the name of Sanders. But if that's true, and Scalise is right, we cannot blame Donald Trump for the lunatics who shot up El Paso or who shot up Dayton. But nevertheless, the left is doing it. And this is a really important distinction to make, and we go back to Epstein. Can you imagine if Jeffrey Epstein, if his clientele list included Donald Trump and George W. Bush and Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan? Can you imagine? We would still be hearing about that aspect of that every day in the news, and we're not. Everybody's scandalized by the death of Epstein, right? But even there are those on the far left who have come out definitively now and argued that Jeffrey Epstein is a kind of victim, that maybe it was the Russians summoned by Trump who killed Epstein in his prison cell. And I have heard left-wing social justice advocates come out and say that quit harping on pedophilia. Pedophilia is not what this is about. That pedophilia is just merely an alternative sexuality, and we should be sympathetic to that, even if Jeffrey Epstein broke the rules. That we can't blame all pedophiles for what Jeffrey Epstein has done. And you see this creepy deflection that you're getting, particularly from the left. Not to mention the fact that Bill Clinton's nasty DNA, blue dress-like, is all over this Epstein scandal. He was on the island numerous times, private planes with Bill and Hillary, lots of campaign donations flowing into the Hillary Clinton coffers. And you don't have to go so far as to bring up Vince Foster, but you could. There does seem to be something inordinately dangerous, life-threatening, to be a high-ranking or a very rich man who has had dealings with the Clintons. That never seems to end with death by natural causes in an old age home, does it? But the Democrat politicians who, I remember a couple of years ago, Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, who had a huge scandal of his own, flying down to Caribbean countries, having liaisons with underage girls, prostitutes, flying back. And of course, nothing ever really happened to Menendez. Because he was a big Democrat Senate candidate. He was a senator who was running for office at the time, and they needed his vote. If the Democrats were going to get back the Senate, they needed a blue senator like Menendez in New Jersey. He won a handy re-election, and nothing ever really happened to him for all of the smoke and some of the fire around his abuse of young girls. And so this evil, wicked double standard is a hallmark of the sickness of our country. We are more than willing to hold Republican politicians responsible. We are more than willing to demand that Republican and conservative politicians step down when they engage in behavior that is wrong and fraught and dangerous and illicit. And there are many on the Republican side who are more than willing to call for Republicans to step down. But you don't have the same thing when it comes to Democrats. You do not have the same reciprocity, right? While most Democrats and most progressives find it difficult to defend Epstein, they don't want you to make the obvious link between Epstein and his political connections. It's not just his billions of dollars that insulated him for so long from the consequences of his actions. It's also his high-ranking, primarily Democrat political connections. That's what's done it. But you're not allowed to say that. Your AOC doesn't say it, right? The brave progressives on the left don't say it. You are not allowed to tar Democrat politicians with bad things done in the name of Democrat politics. And that's what we've got to fight. If we don't fight back against that, if we don't demand that Democrats are as honest with their own negative candidates, their destructive candidates, as Republicans are forced to be with theirs, we will never have anything like equity in this country. We will never have anything like fair elections. We will never have anything like a fair and balanced media until we demand similar behaviors on both sides. Again, the double standards of the left shouldn't surprise us. Somebody once wisely said if progressives didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all. But we on the right and we in the center, we can fight back against this, and we can try to move the dial. Stop attacking Republican politicians for their speech when somebody shoots up a city, even if it has nothing to do with it, while you're willing to excuse people like Epstein and exonerate people like Bill Clinton, who has a big, bad bunch of skeletons in his closet. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Duke with the New American Magazine, and this has been my take on this week's news.